And the scarred tiger paw is on the screen, which can only mean it's time to do the Tigers season preview for football. And to say that they have dominated the ACC when it comes to the sport of football would be kind of an understatement. You know, they've won the last 7 football championships in 8 years, so nothing new to success. But they did have a disappointing end to the season in the Orange Bowl against Tennessee, and so let's just go ahead and talk about the departures. DJ Uiagalelei is gone. He transferred to Oregon State. Um, he had kind of a complicated time there. You know, his first year after backing up Trevor Lawrence, uh, he was expected to be just as good as Lawrence, if not maybe a little bit better, um, in terms of his scrambling ability. But you know, they had some losses. They lost to Georgia in the opening game of the season. Not really a horrible loss there. You know, Georgia ended up winning the national championship that year as well as last year. And they lost to Pitt, who eventually won the ACC uh, that year in football. But they lost to NC State, which was kind of a weird loss for them. You know, they went on the road, so you can kind of excuse it for that. But that NC State team was unranked at the time. And then this past year, sort of a rotating situation with Cade Klubnik. Uliagalelei played most of the time, but he improved his production. He lost some weight, I remember him saying, and he looked better, but overall the offensive production was still a problem. So I really think that that kind of falls on the coordinator, and when we get to arrivals, you'll see what I mean. But yes, DJ Uiagalelei is gone. BT Potter, the kicker for the past 3 years, I believe, for the Clemson Tigers is gone. The only reason I note that is because the level that Clemson is at, you usually have to have a good kicker. I mean, we saw it with Ohio State in the college football playoff game. Not having a good kicker can cost you in big moments. So having a guy like BT Potter usually was a comfort for Clemson fans. So hopefully you find a steady replacement for him. Otherwise, that could end up costing you a big moment. Joseph Ngata is gone from wide receiver. Now, when talking about the offense for Clemson, Joseph Ngata was one of those reliable guys, kind of a Hunter Renfrow type, where he would give you a big catch in a key moment. And I think this is a really big loss for Clemson, a lot bigger than what people have been saying. You know, this one has kind of gone under the radar. Uh, Ngata was a lot of their success came from him and his big moments. He was definitely important to that Clemson offense in the moments where they had production. Also gone is left tackle Jordan McFadden. Um, I don't think you'll have trouble replacing him, but whenever you replace a left tackle, that's important because, as you all know, that's the blind side. And you have to have a good left tackle if you want to protect your quarterback from taking the big shots. And that is always important. Also, you lose Brian Breesy and Miles Murphy to the NFL draft. Not a huge loss because Clemson is just stacked when it comes to the defensive line. I mean, they're kind of defensive line university in the ACC. And so, notable losses, but not a problem for Clemson. They're going to have an exceptional defensive line for the rest of time unless something really wild happens. Arrivals. Now, here's what I was talking about earlier with the offensive coordinator. Garrett Riley from TCU comes to Clemson, South Carolina to help with the offense. Now, I think this is probably the most interesting coordinator move in the ACC, if not the entire Power Five, because Clemson's offense has been the problem ever since Trevor Lawrence left. But I don't think it's entirely because of Trevor Lawrence. I think Clemson had a very basic offense when you compare it to how much people spread the ball around now with, Ohio State and Alabama and LSU when they won the national title. So Clemson was still running that pretty standard 2010s offense where you would, have a pretty balanced attack, not really having that versatile running back that could make catches out of the backfield. Instead, having a guy like Will Shipley uh, run downfield as much as possible and try and tire out the defense over the course of the game. And while that works for most situations, when you face a good team that rotates and has the depth on defense, like a Tennessee, as you saw in the Orange Bowl, or even a South Carolina, or a Florida State, like we're going to see this season, you have to move the ball around in a special way that confuses the defense because they've just gotten better. To be clear, they've really caught on to the tendencies that offenses have, and the 2010s offense has just been figured out. So you have to keep adapting. That's the thing about football is it's a constant adaptation. In the 80s and 90s, everyone ran the triple option because the defenses couldn't figure it out. They didn't have the speed, they didn't have the defensive scheme to stop that. And then that changed, and people transitioned to the late 90s offense, the Steve Spurrier offense where you spread the ball around because it was something that the defense wasn't used to. And that's the same case here. You've gotten to the point where defenses can stop the run even if your run blocking scheme is really good. And so what you have to do is you have to be able to spread the ball around, whether that's improvisation from Cade Klubnik, who I expect to be the starter, or in some other way, like scrambling, making a chaotic, exceptional play on the individual's level, or with your scheme with like trick plays, or how you game plan, attacking the weak point that you see in the defense. And so Garrett Riley comes in from TCU, where they ran that quick strike offense that got them to the national title game, which I think this is a good hire. I don't think it'll 100% pan out the first year. I think he needs to develop these wide receivers, and we'll get to that when I go into the strengths and weaknesses. He needs to develop these wide receivers into what he had at TCU. I don't think Clemson right now has the wide receiver talent that TCU had to run that style of offense. Obviously, you have the offensive line. You have the pass protection. You have the run blocking. Quarterback, that's going to be really interesting to see how Cade Klubnik responds to learning this playbook. Or even Christopher Vizina, who I'll just say now, he comes in as a 4-star quarterback. He could come in this season behind Klubnik. Maybe he knows the playbook a little bit better, studied a little bit more, and he could come in and light up the ACC. You just really don't know because both of these guys are starting from square one with this offense. No one has a really clear advantage other than Klubnik being there for some more time in the program, but we'll see. Other arrivals, Peter Woods, a 5-star defensive lineman, again, just a wealth of talent at the defensive line. Clemson is always going to have those exceptional defensive linemen. It's just a fact. It's death taxes, and Clemson's defensive line is amazing. NFL talent up and down. So yeah, Noble Johnson comes in as a 4-star wide receiver. That's important because, as I said earlier, Wide receiver is a big concern this year for Clemson, and I don't think that Garrett Riley offense is going to be as productive as it was at TCU, and a big part of that is going to be because of those wide receivers. Now, let's talk about the strengths. Obviously, the strength for Clemson is their defense. Always has been since Dabo Sweeney's been there. Always will be. Weaknesses: wide receiver. They don't really have an experienced guy, and even with that, you're learning an entirely new offense. So offense is still a big question mark. I think they'll still have a great running game with Will Shipley. Will Shipley is a tremendous player. He's come from a long line of Clemson running backs that are willing to put their head down and do whatever it takes to get those extra yards. Fight for as much as they can. We saw it with C.J. Spiller. We saw it with Travis Etienne, Gallman, and he's just carrying that on, and he's done a good job. Will Shipley, I think, will be the anchor of this offense. He's going to be a real leader in the locker room. Not to say that Cade Klubnik or Christopher Vizina won't be. I just think that he's going to have the most production to start out, and people in the program will recognize that, and that'll be a comfort for them. So Dabo Sweeney is the head coach of the Tigers. I mean, his reputation really precedes itself. I don't think I need to go into what he's done at Clemson. He's just done an exceptional job. Yeah. So let's get into the schedule. Sorry, that was a bit of a long introduction compared to the BC video. Not to take anything away from anyone else. It's just I think Clemson's. I said this in the BC video with Virginia Tech. They're in an awkward situation, but Clemson's also kind of in an awkward situation. They want to compete for national titles, but they also have to. They have to measure their expectations with what they have and where they're at. And where they're at right now is they are consistently performing on defense, but not on offense, and that's what's holding them back. So that's the big story this season for them. Now let's get into what their season is going to look like. First, starting off on a Monday Night Football against Duke, at Duke in Durham, North Carolina, Wallace Wade Stadium. Let me start off by saying I actually really like Wallace Wade Stadium. I think it's pretty. I really like the horseshoe style stadium with the open end. I know a lot of people really don't like really anything about Duke football, but I think Wallace Wade Stadium might be it's definitely in my top 5 for ACC stadiums. I think it might be 3 or 4. And I can do a video if anyone's interested in maybe a ranking list of the ACC stadiums, but I digress. Monday Night Football against Duke. So, obviously this is a win, but I want to say that Duke is not what Duke has been for the past decade, really. And that being said, Mike Elko comes in and takes this program into a completely different situation. They go 9-4, and people are excited about Duke football again. They won a bowl game, and Mike Elko has put a lot of hype behind this Duke football program. Not for championships yet, but at least to make a bowl game consistently. So yeah, a win, but I think this is closer than a lot of people think. I would say Clemson probably wins by about 10 points simply because Mike Elko is a coach that'll have his team prepared for a game like this. And Monday Night Football against Clemson, you're going to have a crowd at Wallace Wade Stadium. Don't know how much of it will be Duke fans, but the Duke football team, the actual team, will be excited for that opportunity to play in a national spotlight. They're the only game on, 8 p.m., ESPN. Everyone's going to be tuning into that game just to watch some football on Monday night. A very good opportunity for the Duke Blue Devils in football. Next, you go home to Clemson, Death Valley Memorial Stadium, to take on the Charleston Southern Buccaneers. Not much to say here. It's Charleston Southern. You'll be beating them by like 30 by halftime. Cade Klubnik or Christopher Vizina whichever one of them is starting, will be out by halftime. You'll get to see your 8 defensive linemen that'll eventually go to the NFL play in this game. Probably kill a Charleston Southern quarterback. Who knows? So yeah, you pick up the win there. Then you take on Florida Atlantic. Same thing, pretty much. It won't be by as much. 31-10, probably 38-10. An easy win for you. Florida Atlantic. Not much to say about their football program there. Their basketball program is pretty good. Made the Final Four. Just wanted to note that. That's about the only thing I know about Florida Atlantic. And then, oh boy, you take on, at home, the third-ranked Florida State Seminoles in what is probably the most anticipated game in conference play. Florida State, as I said in the Boston College season preview, has not been at the level that they used to be when Jimbo Fisher was there. As I said in that video, won the national title in 2013 with the Heisman Trophy winner Jameis Winston. But now with Mike Norvell, he seems to have them back at that prominent level that we're used to seeing Florida State at. Now, if Florida State wins this game, they can probably say that they are back. I think this is the game that determines whether or not the Seminoles truly are back. Florida State has had wins against top 10 teams since Fisher left. I know they have one against North Carolina in 2020, but UNC does not have the same football history as Clemson, and they don't have the same accomplishments in football as Clemson. And Clemson is the gold standard of the ACC in football, let's be honest. So if Florida State wins this game, I am perfectly okay with them saying they are back, because to be the best, you have to beat the best. And right now, Clemson is the best. So what do I think? Who's going to win this game? Well, I think home field advantage is a huge part in games like this. I think it's a huge part in any game, but particularly in these top 10 matchups. I assume this will be a top 10 matchup unless Florida State trips up against Boston College. Watch the Boston College preview for my thoughts on that. But I think home field advantage is a huge part because Clemson for a long time had a home win streak simply because of the energy that was brought by the fan base in Memorial Stadium. You know, when these players go out on the field, they're pumped up by the crowd, the crowd that supports them. And simply because of that, I think Clemson gets the win against the Florida State Seminoles. I think Jordan Travis gets a little rattled by that defensive line that Clemson has, and they lose to Clemson. Now, Next year, I'll probably say it in the other way. Florida State will have their crowd hyped up for this game, and they'll probably win that next year simply because they're at home. Now, could I be completely wrong and Florida State goes in like they did with Jameis Winston and blow you out when you had Taj Boyd and it was another top 10 matchup? Sure, that can happen. But Jordan Travis, from what I've seen, is not at the level that Jameis Winston was that year. That's not to take away from who he is as a player and what he can do. I just think that's a credit to who Jameis Winston was when he was at Florida State. So those are my thoughts. Florida State, you beat Florida State at home. After a 3-game homestand, you go on the road at Syracuse. Now, this is an interesting game for Clemson. Clemson has lost to Syracuse before under Dabo Swinney on the road, and they've had some close calls at home. And if you were looking for a team in the first half of the schedule for Clemson to trip up against, other than obviously Florida State, it would be against Syracuse. Wake Forest is next on the schedule, but you get them at home, and I think this is going to be a down year for Wake Forest. Losing Sam Hartman was big for them, and I think this is going to be their recovering year. This is going to be a building year for them, which is not bad for Wake Forest. You know, they got a 10-win season 2 seasons ago, which is only the second time they've ever done that in program history. So Wake Forest, not a bad program, not in a bad spot, just in a rebuilding spot. And I think you'll, to go back to Syracuse, I think you'll beat Syracuse. I think that Syracuse keeps it close like they usually do with you. But you get the win nonetheless. And then Wake Forest, you beat them at home for homecoming. Then you get your bye week in a really important spot because, boy, oh boy, do you have a tough stretch after your bye week. You go at Miami, at NC State, and then you come back home to face off against the 13th ranked Notre Dame Fighting Irish. This is a really tough stretch, and to be honest, I think you're going 2-1. I think you beat Miami. I think you lose to NC State, and I think you get revenge against Notre Dame. Now, let me explain. Miami is not at the level of NC State or Notre Dame. We saw that last year. Tyler Van Dyke is a good quarterback, but we've seen Miami face off against that Clemson defense before, and they haven't been able to get any production. So I think it's one of those situations where until I see it done, I can't really pick it to happen. And I haven't seen Miami beat Clemson in the past 10 years, so I can't really... It's hard for me to pick them to do that. But NC State, you know, the last time Clemson went to Raleigh to play the Wolfpack, they lost. And I think so much has been put on that Notre Dame game from last year when they blew Clemson out that Clemson has circled that game on their calendar. You know, they've circled that game. They've circled the South Carolina game at the end of the year. And, of course, the Florida State game. Those would be the games that I think are most important to the Clemson staff. But I think they overlook the Wolfpack. And since it's 2 road games in a row, that's really hard. And with this offense, you know, NC State's defense they've been playing at the level that Clemson has, and their offense, I think, is going to be better than it has been in the past. That'll be a low scoring game between Clemson and NC State, but I think NC State edges it out with probably a late field goal or maybe a late touchdown probably in the final minute. Um, and Notre Dame, you get the win against. So, good revenge game against Notre Dame. You're still in the run for the playoff. You're still in the run for the ACC championship. Just a speed bump with the Wolfpack in Raleigh. Then you take on your rival, Georgia Tech. Brent Key is trying to rebuild that program to what it was in the 50s and 90s, early 90s, late 90s, not the mid 90s. Um, Georgia Tech not there yet, so you get a win against them. I forgot to say the three permanent opponents for Clemson in the new ACC schedule format is Florida State, Georgia Tech, and NC State. Which NC State and Florida State, that's pretty tough to have them as permanent opponents. But Clemson's definitely up to the challenge, no doubt. And it'll be interesting to see those matchups develop from years to come, especially with Florida State. Uh, so yeah, and then you take on the North Carolina Tar Heels with Drake May, another Heisman hopeful quarterback. Um, you face three. I forgot to mention Sam Hartman with Notre Dame. I don't see him on many Heisman lists, but I think you can certainly count him as at least a candidate, maybe not a hopeful. I don't know. We don't know what numbers he's going to put up with that new offense, new pro style offense, rather than the Dave Clawson offense, or the Clawfence, as my friends like to call it. We just don't know. But I think you're legitimately facing three Heisman hopeful quarterbacks at the very least, and that's pretty hard because they're all very talented. Um, but you got the defense for it, so I think you get the win at North Carolina. Uh, or sorry, against North Carolina, not at North Carolina. Simply because your defense will be able to shut down Drake May. Drake May, he hasn't had that signature moment against a really good defense. They lost pretty much every game where they had to compete against defense that had legitimate NFL talent on it. Notre Dame was one. NC State, not a lot of NFL talent on that defense, but there was some, and they also lost that game. Um, so yeah, and then you finish the season off with a road game against your SEC rival, South Carolina. Now, this is going to be a contest of, can you stop Spencer Rattler, and can the offense do enough to manage some points? And to be honest, I think at this point of the year, you do. I think you beat South Carolina. It's going to be a very tough and physical game, obviously. But it's such a big point for Dabo Swinney to win that game against the SEC that he's emphasized it so much that the team will get it done. And so I think you get a win against the Gamecocks. And that will put you at the record of 11-1, which I think will be good enough to be in the ACC championship game. And I think you'll be competing for a playoff spot at the end of the year with that championship game. And so that's going to be the end of the season preview for the Clemson Tigers. I want to thank everyone who watched the last video and who subscribed. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you in the next video, which will be Duke.